now, got in trouble on trial. Just keep putting on the brakes, but everybody makes mistakes. Not sure what's next, can't find it in the text. Voice cracks, time to sing. Wanna dance a wild thing. Wrong foot, deep fried kids, it's wanna hide. Look harder, gonna find a good person deep inside. Oh, middle school matters. Middle school matters. It matters if you happen to be that middle school kid. So take a look, take a listen, don't wait, time's ticking. Parent, teacher, grandma, cousin, uncle, stepmom, notice every smile, frown, acting up, helping out. Good day, bad week, need a ton of relief. Made it worse than it is, can't help it, need a friend. Principal to secretary, more love, less theory. Oh, middle school matters. Middle school matters. It matters if you happen to be that middle school kid. Middle school matters. Middle school matters. Middle school matters. Middle school matters. Middle school matters if you happen to be that. Middle school matters if you
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Pennsylvania Association for Middle Level Education's webinar series for 2021-2022. This evening, we are very, very pleased to have our partners from Brainpower with us to share some great information about how to work with young people. And supporting students' goals, this is so important, and SEL, something that we're all dealing with every single day. We're also very thankful for our partners, Eastern University, for being the hosts of this evening's webinar, as well as all the webinars coming up. I would invite you to put on your calendar right now, December 8th at 7:00 p.m., the second Tuesday of the month at 7:00 p.m. That's when all of our webinars will be held. Next month, we're going to have Jen Court with us, and I'm just going to put a shout out to Jen. Hi, Jen. Notice you're with us this evening. Glad to have you here. She's going to be talking about Help Us Begin. This is the title of her brand new book. So when you see HUB, H-U-B, think Help Us Begin. How do we learn those strategies and mindsets for meaningful conversations with young people and, of course, with their parents and caretakers? Just how does that happen? So on behalf of the Pennsylvania Association for Middle Level Education, we welcome each and every one of you. We hope you have a wonderful evening. Make sure that if you are going to request Act 48 credits, that you complete the evaluation just as soon as possible and submit that to us.
Okay, thank you, Paul. And again, I'd like to welcome everybody to our webinar this evening. As you know, the work that we do is deeply rooted in the successful middle school, this we believe. This is the landmark position paper from AMLE and really does explain what it is that we believe is necessary for that successful middle school. It is a book that is rooted in research. And so when we present our webinars, we like to make sure that you recognize there is a tie-in to things that are actually research-based. And we realize that if these concepts, these characteristics are part of what you're doing in your schools, then this should result in a successful experience for kids. And our partners this evening from Brainpower are going to give you some ideas as to how you can address some of those characteristics, but more importantly, how you can conserve some time and do a lot of things in a more efficient manner, perhaps. As you know, the successful middle school is developed around 5 essential attributes and 18 characteristics. And the characteristics that we're going to look at this evening, and you can think about how this relates back to the information that Brainpower will share with you. But one of the things we know is it's important for educators to respect and value young adolescents as the young adolescents they are at age 10 to 15. We also know that we want every student's academic and personal development to be guided by an adult advocate. And they're going to provide you with some ideas that how that might help you get to know a little bit more about your students and what they are doing. When it comes to curriculum instruction and assessment, one of the things that we're thinking about is that health, wellness, and social emotional competence are supported in the curricula, school-wide programs, and health-related policies. We know that SEL is a major issue in schools these days. And again, some of the things that Brainpower will talk to you about may help to address some of that. So at this point in time, I'm going to stop my share and turn it over to the folks from Brainpower.
Thank you, Gail. My name is Michelle Donahue, and I am joined tonight with Dr. Ned Sahin, our CEO and founder, Jim Ryan, our COO, and Neha Keshav, our Chief of Staff and Director of Research. And we are extremely excited to be here tonight to present to you on the topic of SEL debt and how to best support your students with their goals in the classroom.
Join Brainpower founder and CEO, Dr. Ned Sahin, as he discusses the SEL debt crisis and the impact on students, teachers, and parents as schools return to in-person learning this fall. Explore the impact that the COVID-19 pandemic has had on the social, emotional, and mental well-being of students. And learn strategies to help you and your students navigate the classroom post-pandemic. When you successfully complete this session, you should be able to analyze the 3 main interconnected areas of the SEL 5 core competencies to address SEL debt. Describe 5 trauma-informed strategies you can implement to support students' executive functioning and social-emotional development. Examine 1 new tech tool to support and track your students' social-emotional and executive function goals. There are 3 parts to this session. Section 3.1, a deep look into the SEL debt crisis. Section 3.2, trauma's impact on social-emotional development. Section 3.3, tracking student goals to support social-emotional and executive functioning growth.
What struggles do you expect to face with your students as you return to in-person learning? Share your thoughts in the chat.
We've lost about a year to a year and a half, depending on the district, of in-person learning. In-person learning, we know, is crucial to form the social bonds, to learn the very nuanced, in a way, social and emotional principles and talents of how to interact with each other, regulate your own emotions, understand the emotions of others, because literally it's about others, need to be bathed in the complex situations of each other. So we know at least we've lost the amount of time that people have been out of school. We also know from every year, the summer slide, that when you're away for a certain amount of time, skills atrophy. So baseline is we're way behind by a year, year and a half, but it might actually be for some students more like double that. And why? Because we don't just see a decrement of what could have been, that learning that was missed, but in fact, these people have been bathed in environments that are absolutely challenging and even traumatizing. So let's break it down. For instance, some students have been around parents who are absolutely stressed, very high levels of existential anxiety. Existential because some of them may have actually had COVID and some may have passed away, or grandparents may have passed away. So these students, at whatever age they're interfacing with this, may have been forced to contemplate death and fear of death at a very real and existential level. And even that may have happened within well-elaborated and supportive homes. Let's take situations where the child is living with one parent, that one parent is dealing with a lot of stress. Maybe it's with a grandparent. Parents may have been subject to some very dangerous situations, or maybe substance abusers, and there may be other stressors in the household, of people transiently in the household. These are situations that happen throughout the country anyway, and subject students to traumatic stress. Now, if you couple that with the lack of contact with extended family, the lack of contact with other students, and compound it because of all of the extra risks and vulnerabilities due to the social isolation and the anxiety of the pandemic, we're talking about people who would have already been challenged now being catapulted backward, not just learning loss, the potential of the learning that they could have had, but actually being pushed back and having significant mental stress and trauma. This is a recipe for disaster.
The CASEL framework for social emotional learning is comprised of 5 core competencies, which can essentially be thought of as 3 main interconnected areas: regulating self, interacting with others, and decision-making. From preschool through high school, students continue to develop in these 3 areas. During the pandemic, many hybrid and remote learning difficulties have stemmed from students, as well as families and teachers, not having developed the social-emotional skills to adapt to learning in new contexts. Returning to the brick-and-mortar classroom will be yet another challenging transition that will encompass this coming school year and beyond, which is why focusing on these 3 main SEL areas is more important than ever. The first area we will focus on is self-regulation. All students need to develop self-awareness of what pandemic events and changes in their lives have meant for them. What emotions are they experiencing, and what are the most effective ways for them to use these emotions in their learning and interactions with others? In this way, teachers will need to go beyond the SEL basics and extend to helping students process their return to in-person school, especially as social distancing guidelines change and masks may be optional or no longer needed at all. A focus in this area suggests a change in the content of learning self-awareness and regulation skills, whether it is through morning messages and circle time for young children or narrative writing and group discussion for older students. Language arts, health education, and fine arts will be essential in these explorations of: who am I? Why do I feel this way? How can my emotions help me learn? How can I be happy? Exploring a sense of self and identity is critical to SEL development, and students need this exploration as their lives move beyond the pandemic. Next is social interactions with others. Alongside personal social emotional awareness, students will need to develop their social skills with others. A year of social distancing, social cancellations, and masking has been critical for public health policy, but detrimental to students' social-emotional development. Most students have not had typical social interactions over the last year. The new school year needs to be approached with much more social interaction that is positive, equitable, and carefully planned and monitored. Teaching social skills should be a part of every lesson, and teachers must be careful not to return to the status quo. All student groupings should be carefully planned and supported to promote respectful and productive interactions. For example, classroom, playground, hallways, cafeteria, and after-school events. When left to their own choices, students do not always benefit from partner or group work because they do not know how to choose students they might work best with, and they do not always know how to interact effectively. This is even more true after the pandemic. Social skills must be explicitly taught and regularly practiced at all ages. Classrooms are unique situations, and students will need to adjust to these dynamic environments. Teachers will need to plan a coherent SEL curriculum across the academic year to sequence SEL lessons. For example, September, learning everyone's name and using it in classroom talk. October, demonstrating listening by rephrasing, using hand signals to agree or disagree, and using sentence stems and key phrases that help students speak, actively listen, and build on each other's ideas. November, taking turns in small groups and participating in equitable ways, not over-talking or under-contributing, learning how to invite others to the conversation and connect contributions. Have fun together. Students and teachers need to experience more joy in the classroom. Teachers of all ages should be thinking of ways to add fun into their planning, whether it's through non-competitive games, visuals, stories, stress reduction activities, or some other means. Returning to school is going to be socially awkward and challenging. Learning will be frustrating at times. Having fun in the classroom with a variety of peers will be critical to students' social-emotional learning. Last, we will focus on decision-making skills. Making responsible decisions is the third area of Castle's SEL framework that pulls social emotional learning together. This competency area reflects the ability to make decisions that are ethically and socially responsible. The pandemic has shined a spotlight on the need for more developed and responsible decision-making, a need that continuously shows up in our classrooms and everyday lives. As more and more students return to in-person learning, teachers need to support students in being able to think about how our actions might impact others, respond effectively when there are unintended consequences of our actions, be curious and initiate new experiences, make decisions based on data and facts. Just as teachers need a plan for helping students gain personal and social-emotional awareness skills, we will need to have critical conversations and design lessons around responsible decision-making. These lessons can be designed for all ages and approach essential questions like, why do people wear masks? What are some ways to have fun and socially distance? How do we know which pieces of information about COVID to trust? Do you feel you are prepared to teach SEL? Only 22% of teachers feel that they are very prepared to teach SEL, and 64% feel they are somewhat prepared.
We have to think not just about that student, because that student interacts or fails to interact well with other students. And then the family environment impacts the student, and then the student's dysregulation impacts the family, impacts siblings, impacts parents, and impacts the ability of parents to provide a useful and stabilizing context and environment for the students. So these are very, very complex interactions, and they work in multiple directions. And I say complex, that doesn't mean it's hard to understand. It's actually very easy to understand that we're going to have a compounding factor here. One student is dysregulated, the students around him, her, or them are also going to be dysregulated, and they're going to have more stress on them. You're absorbing the bandwidth of the teacher, you're absorbing the bandwidth of the parent to take care of the student who is most at risk and most challenged. Now you've reduced the amount of bandwidth, of ability to model a stable environment for that student and to address the needs of the other students. At different times of my life and through graduate school and postdoctoral fellowship, I've done different types of education. And one thing I can say that probably others listening to this will resonate with is that many times you can spend 80% of your time on 20% of the students, even maybe 90% on 10% of the students who need you the most. But that leaves the rest of the class with almost no attention, feedback, modeling, and support from the teacher. They quietly do well enough. But well enough is not enough. And well enough is not enough when we all are being shifted down to help address the needs of the really severely challenged students now, and the probably very large increase we're going to see in numbers of students who this year end up on IEPs and end up needing a lot of extra support. And they need it. You need to devote to them. In the end, what does that mean? So the siblings, the other students, and the teachers have less to give to the students who, again, would quietly do well enough. They're going to be missing out. They're going to be left behind as well. They sometimes talk about social emotional learning as the soft skills. I like to say that the soft skills are the hard skills. They're hard to learn. they're really hard on you if you don't have them. So these are the hard skills. Why are they hard? Well, for instance, understanding your own emotions, complex things happening inside, well, inside yourself. It turns out it's inside your brain, and these are biochemical interactions, very complex ones. What it feels like to the person is just things going out of control, a mess inside, and the inability to focus, get on task, regulate, and operate in that nice homeostatic zone, that zone of balance. And without that, tethering us, centering us, almost nothing we would want to do will come easy. Almost nothing we'll be able to do at our normal baseline level of talent. So, in other words, you get worse at just about everything when you're stressed out, dysregulated, and behind in social emotional learning. Interestingly, when we fast forward to later in life, the gateway major events of life of finding a romantic partner and finding steady employment, the social emotional skills are always the differentiator. It's quite great if you have the physics background or the accounting background or the legal background needed for your job. But you will get through that interview based on your social emotional skills. You will maintain relationships with your colleagues, advance, and just maintain employment based on your social emotional skills. Likewise, in personal life, partner is not just a great luxury and a great joy in life. It's actually deeply correlated with your mental health outcomes and your physiological health outcomes. It's hard work, and the work that you do is social emotional work. So we're setting up students for being potentially underemployed and under-socialized and potentially at health risk if we don't give them the skills, coach them in these very important skills for later life. They seem like soft skills, but they are hard, they are crucial, and they are things we can teach. A little side note, when I was growing up, these were often the types of skills that people said, oh, those are the things they don't teach you in school. What that meant was you have to just either be good at that or not. You know how to deal with people or you don't. You know how to be an adult or you don't. That part is hogwash. All of these skills are trainable. The brain is eminently trainable. Social skills, it's one of the things it does naturally and does well, if not fast enough, when left alone. You're unlikely to learn physics equations on your own. You are likely to learn how and when to say hello, goodbye, and can I help you on your own. Those are social skills. They are crucial and needed, but they used to be not taught in school. That didn't mean that they couldn't be taught in school. In the last 10, 15 years, but especially in the last 5 years, many school districts have taken it as a central charge to teach very methodically SEL. And the SEL skills we're teaching have a systematicity to them. We can teach them. We can teach them successfully. And we need to. And now we just lost a year and a half at least, if not multiple years equivalent of these SEL skills. And if we only focus on catching up in math, we're going to be so far behind and we're going to be not serving our students well because they're going to grow up stunted in their development and in their ability to interact with others and to pass those important gateways of romantic partnership and steady employment.
Do you get overwhelmed by the social and emotional problems of your students? "58% of elementary teachers and 51% of secondary teachers say that they often feel overwhelmed by the social and emotional problems that their students have.
childhood trauma is associated with barriers to school achievement, as traumatic stress can disrupt social, emotional, cognitive, and brain development. Specifically, childhood trauma can adversely impact students' self-regulation and executive functioning skills, organization, comprehension, and memorization, for example. This has negative consequences for learning, as shared by the Center on the Developing Child at Harvard University. With current and future circumstances presenting unprecedented obstacles, it is important for teachers to take a trauma-informed approach with their students, one that cultivates relationships, shared agency, structure, self-regulation, and social-emotional learning in order to reduce isolation, build community, and strengthen students' resilience moving forward. Depending on your district, trauma-informed teaching methods may be standard practice. But for many, teaching with a trauma-informed lens is something new and potentially overwhelming. It's clear that society isn't the same as it was last March of 2020. In fact, studies show that the pandemic caused significant trauma, and as we know, the effects of trauma can appear weeks, months, or years later. Responding to trauma is not only helpful for students' healing, but also teaches them that their classroom, school, and district are safe places. As educators help rebuild and satisfy kids' hierarchy of needs, students will be more invested into school and their learning. Let's take a look at some trauma-informed strategies to support your students' executive functioning and social-emotional well-being. Employ thoughtful interactions. Traumatized students can behave in ways that may interfere with teaching and learning. Teachers are in a position of power, and these students may be overly defensive, anticipating adult criticism, or defiant as a way to feel in control. However, when students feel they are with a safe and supportive adult, their behavior is often reflected in that. Consider this scenario. Andrew is a 6th grader whose father overdosed 2 years ago and who has witnessed ongoing domestic abuse for years. Andrew was in Miss Cole's class for part of the day and Miss Fisk's class for the other part. Miss Cole had a reputation of working well with hard-to-reach kids, and sure enough, Andrew behaved in a stellar way in her class. When he was with Miss Fisk, however, was sent to the office nearly 3 times a week for explosive behavior. Teachers are 50% in every interaction with a student. By changing the way we give a direction or respond to a student, we can reduce problematic behavior. Miss Cole had taken the time to build a trusting relationship with Andrew and learn to give directions in a way that he would respond well to. Interaction strategies are a type of accommodation that typically go unnamed and unwritten, but they were the reason that Andrew could feel safe and access the curriculum. If Miss Cole had written down the successful strategies she used with Andrew, the list might have started with avoiding authoritative directives such as "pick that up." To give Andrew a sense of control, Miss Cole always embedded choice in her directions, asking, "Do you want to be in the front of the line or the back of the line?" instead of simply telling him to line up. This helped prevent a poor reaction. Miss Cole also conveyed respect and transparency by providing the reason behind each direction. Instead of saying, "No backpacks on the floor, I don't want to trip and fall," Miss Cole would say, "Oh dear, I hope I don't fall. I have a bad knee. Could you please move your backpack?" Stating the reason first assured that Andrew knew the context and necessity of the demand. Conversely, Miss Fisk would often go up close to Andrew, tower over him, and say in front of his peers, "Stop tapping your pencil." This typically ended in a power struggle and Andrew's escalating behavior. Andrew, like many traumatized students, had experienced a loss of control in his life, and power struggles with an authoritative figure were particularly triggering. Miss Cole instinctively knew that a more private, nonverbal direction could be less confrontational for a student in fight or flight mode. She would write, "Please stop tapping," on a piece of paper, put it gently on Andrew's desk without his peers noticing, and then give him space by walking away quickly. When possible, she also gave Andrew extended time to comply with directions to avoid power struggles, asking, for example, "Can you please pick that up before lunch?" rather than "Pick that up now." This allowed Andrew time to decompress and respond rationally. Building a relationship with a student can be the key to success with them. One way you can build a relationship with a student, especially one who has experienced trauma and could benefit from a positive relationship with an adult figure, is by taking interest in your student's likes and hobbies. Let's think back to Miss Cole and Andrew. She would greet Andrew every day at the classroom door and ask him about Star Wars or football because she knew he loved those things. She also used the 2x10 rule. She talked to him for 2 minutes a day for 10 days in a row about topics unrelated to academics or behavior. Whenever Miss Cole could see she wouldn't have time for this in the 10-day period, she asked the guidance counselor or special education teacher to watch her class for 2 minutes so she could go for a walk with Andrew. She repeated this trust-building strategy several times throughout the year, especially after he exhibited anger or frustration and after-school vacations and long weekends. Traumatized students often engage in inaccurate thinking, tending to focus on the negative. Common classroom management strategies often only exacerbate this tendency. How many of you have seen frequent movement breaks on a student's IEP or student success plan? It's one of the most common accommodations that is offered to students who seem dysregulated. Unfortunately, during these breaks, students can potentially ruminate on negative memories, current stressors, angry thoughts, or worries. If we ask a high school student who is getting angry and becoming agitated to take a walk, he may think about the things making him mad the entire time and return just as angry. Sending a first grader to a calming chair can be effective for some, but for others, it can lead the student to fixate on worrying thoughts. Instead, we need to help them change the channel. When adults can't sleep, we often read a book or watch TV, which distracts us from uncomfortable thoughts so we can fall back asleep. Teachers can use the same principle for kids with trauma and anxiety. Teach students that their brain is like a remote control that they can use to switch the channel to help them calm down. These switching activities are called cognitive distractions or thought breaks and are incompatible with negative thinking. A listening center or find the picture activity can be helpful to young children. For older students, you might try Mad Libs, trivia, or more abstract strategies such as counting all the green items in the room, saying the alphabet backward, or thinking of the first 10 lines of a favorite movie. Behavior is communication, and we explained previously how traumatized students often communicate feelings through their behavior. Teachers' behavior is also communication, and it may not be communicating the message we are striving to send. Common teacher practices such as ignoring inappropriate behavior, sending students to the office, or sending younger kids to sit alone at a back table or in the hallway can unintentionally trigger students who have experienced abandonment or neglect. We need to remember that when some of our students were young and cried, no one came. Ignoring them can trigger a trauma response and make them feel the teacher doesn't like them or is even happy that they are upset. Instead of ignoring a student when he is expressing anger, such as by crumpling up a paper, growling, or slinging a book from his desk onto the floor, you can respond to such moments in a more positive and productive way. When you notice these behaviors at the beginning of the year, you can validate the student's feelings by saying things like, "I am sorry you are upset," or "I see that you are angry." This is a much more empathetic approach, will preserve the relationship, and will avoid triggering a trauma response in the student. Another practice to be cautious about is using time with a preferred adult as an incentive. For example, a teacher might say, "If you complete all of your homework this week, you and I can have lunch together on Friday." The problem with this is that if the student doesn't get all their homework finished, then the teacher withholds their attention and time. This implies the student-teacher relationship is conditional and can trigger an abandonment trauma response for some students. It is better to use one-to-one time with students in a non-contingent way. This way, adults are communicating, "I like you for who you are, not I like you when you behave the right way." Students can't learn unless they feel safe. When it comes to student trauma, there is so much that is beyond a teacher's control. However, there is also so much they can do to build a supportive environment where students feel safe and comfortable and are willing to take risks, learn, and even heal. Start with some of the strategies we just mentioned or combine them with strategies you currently use to create a safe and supportive environment for your students.
What is one way you try to incorporate SEL into your core academic lessons? Share your thoughts in the chat.
With all the SEL debt backed up in the system, this is likely an incredibly difficult time for you as a teacher. And I've heard from many, many teachers that This, in fact, is the hardest teaching year they've had. And many are at the end of their mental reserve. I was deeply concerned and sympathetic when I first learned how much this issue was mounting. As a quick aside, our team includes neuroscientists and teachers and psychiatrists, essentially a mental health dream team. And our mission is to apply the science of how the brain learns to tools and strategies that assist teachers in very demanding environments. My own PhD is in cognitive neuroscience, and I'm passionate about empowering people who have invisible brain differences and the teachers out there on the front lines who serve them. So when I started hearing about this rapidly increasing burden on teachers, I first of all researched objective statistics on just how bad that burden is. It's bad, but perhaps you will at least find it somehow comforting to learn how widely shared the burden is by teachers like you across our country. So here's one staggering statistic to start with. Even in these crushing years, people in other jobs have a rate of depression of only 10%. But for teachers, it's 27%. Now, there are likely many different reasons for this rate of depression, but one of them is stress. So what percentage of teachers do you think report being significantly stressed in their jobs? If you said 75%, you would be right. And again, this is much higher for teachers than for other professionals. So what happens when you're that stressed in your job? Well, for many teachers, they reach a point where eventually they quit. They leave the profession. Let's take special education teachers in specific for a moment here. The yearly turnover rate amongst you who are special educators is 25% every year. So what's the biggest driver of all this stress and depression and exiting of the profession? Well, many teachers tell us it is often the level of reporting burden. Now, we all know reporting is necessary, but there are many inconveniences in how it's done, and there are not enough tools. And so this blocks you from spending the quality time you wish in your classroom. I hate to say it, but I have bad news, which is that we're going to have even more of a burden. With students now returning from intermittent social isolation in stressed, emotionally stressed homes, it's inevitable that their social emotional learning skills are going to be way behind and further behind than ever. And that means more reporting and more reporting on more students. So that's the bad news, but we're here with some good news. Once we researched and discovered this expanding burden, my team and I worked on ways to assist you and teachers like you. We want to make your life easier. We want to give you back time from reporting to use with your students in the classroom and with your own children at home. And since we know that more students are going to be referred for special ed, and of course the caseload never stops, many of you are going to be writing what are known as SMART goals for IEPs. But even if you don't write IEPs, this SMART style of goals is actually the best way to track and to motivate progress on really any type of skill. So this applies to all of your students. And so that's why we're going to spend a few minutes right after this refreshing you on what a SMART style goal is and how to write a great one. And of course, once you have your SMART goals, you have to log the data toward them. And 80% of teachers tell us that they still use paper to record the primary data. So that's why in the section afterward, we're going to spend a few minutes introducing to you a new software tool, which has a free pilot, and it can turn data collecting into a single button, single click digital task. And then all your data stay there on your computer right from the beginning, not later when you have to collect the Post-it notes and pieces of paper and put them into a spreadsheet. And it generates your charts for you, for your reports, and it saves a lot of time. So Are you ready to hear about SMART goals and hear about a tool that can help you? All right, let's go. As I mentioned, we're going to have a refresher on SMART goals and get practice with a little software tool that helps create compliant SMART goals and helps you log data. So let's focus first on the SMART goals. We're going to start with a poll to see where we all stand. So you should see the poll on your screen now, namely, what does the R stand for in the acronym SMART? So go ahead, answer, and don't worry about it. It's not going to be held against you. Just throw down what you think right away and go ahead and answer. Okay, great. About to close it. All right. Well, it looks like we got a mix of responses, but that's okay. I'm not doing a poll as sort of a gotcha moment. This is just to see where we stand, and also as a reminder that a lot of teachers can benefit from a refresher like this. The correct answer for R is relevant. Relevant. I chose the R for this poll because it's the letter in the acronym that the largest number of teachers often mistake. But first, let's back up and let's take a look at what each letter stands for. SMART is specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. Why do SMART goals need to be all these things? The answer is that these are what allow you to prove that someone actually met the goal. The goal is about performing something, and the SMART aspects allow you to prove that performance. Stepping back a minute, remember, a goal is different from an aim or intention. An aim might be something like, I want to be better at understanding other people. That's an aim, and that can drive you toward understanding other people. But I can't use that to figure out if you got there. A goal is something that tries to prove that you actually got there, that you achieved mastery. If you are able to perform the goal, then that should be tantamount to your having reached the aim. And that's why we set goals very carefully and why we measure performance on those goals. Remember, we cannot measure abstract mental states like knowledge. We can only measure performance. So let's take a hypothetical student, Albert. Albert often gets in trouble because he doesn't understand his classmates' facial cues. He doesn't know when he says something if other students find it funny. He doesn't know when other students are angry or even pose a danger to him. So we know he's at risk of bullying and at risk of not having friends, and later on in life of not getting a date. So what kind of goal are we going to set that has all the SMART aspects and can help Albert towards understanding the emotions of others? Of course, there's a wide set of possibilities, and I could go through each aspect with you and come up with a goal together. But in the interest of time, here's one possible example goal. By the annual review date, Albert will match pictures of faces to the correct emotion out of 7 emotion cards with 80% accuracy during 4 out of 5 trials. So here's what that can look like. We see the overall goal category, emotions in others. We see the kernel of the goal, namely that Albert will match pictures of faces to the correct emotion, etc. And then we see 2 sets of criteria below. So is this a SMART goal? Is it specific? Yes, we went from understanding emotions to something very specific, matching faces of real people to emotion cards. And it's measurable because we're talking about 80% accuracy. It's time-bound because we have certain number of observation periods. We have 4 out of 5 trials. Could have been 4 out of 5 weeks. So it's time-bound. And is it achievable? Well, we'd have to know the present level of performance, but presumably it was designed so that it would be achievable within that reporting period or that year. And is it relevant? Yes, this is relevant to the need to understand other people's emotions in order to get through social situations. So it's specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. So you saw the goal represented in this graphical way with that rectangle or tile. And that's from the software we're about to trial together. And one of the really exciting things inside this software is an ability to construct a goal like this with a nice, simplified interface that lets you write the core of the goal and then choose the criteria. So let's take a look at that. This is what the goal constructor looks like. You see a place for the core of the goal and the two criteria. Don't just follow along. Let's actually do this all together. So I'm going to give you a chance to take a look at this software and try it out. So go to the following URL that's on your screen, namely go.fastiep.com. So head on over there now, open up another browser and separate window so you can look at it, and go.fastiep.com. You know the raise hand gesture? If everyone would please raise your hand when you've gone to that page. All right, so I'm starting to see some. So yeah, raise your hand when you have that page open. You're going to need this later because the next breakout uses this tool to go through constructing another IEP goal. And that's how, of course, all of these things are relevant for you getting your PD hours. So yeah, now go ahead and enter. It's very simple to put your name and email address there. This is a free pilot, so don't worry about that. And go on in. When you've entered your information, you'll see a screen like this that shows you different goals in some example students, and it reminds you to click on one of them to see what the interface is like. When you've gotten to that screen, now raise your hand gesture in Zoom. Wonderful. I'm going to give you a quick tour of the FAST IEP interface because you'll need FAST IEP for the next breakout exercise. When you look at the main screen, you'll see the students on your left and then the main goal tiles on the right. And each tile represents one goal. You can click anywhere in the tile to log an event for that goal. A single event, someone did something or didn't do something. The computer takes all the data and generates your reports and data charts and everything for you later. So that's the basics. Now scroll down to the bottom of the current student's goals and you'll see a tile that says add a new goal. Got that? Great. Click on that tile, and that's the goal constructor. So now let's input into this goal constructor what we just had as a goal for Albert. So first of all, go to the top and you'll see a category drop down. And when you pop that up, you'll see social emotional learning, SEL, as one of the categories on the left. Select that one. That opens up a submenu on the right, and in that submenu you can see emotions of others. Select that one and press OK. Now you have the goal kernel. This is where we write the center of what it is we want as our goal. We can come back to the criteria later. So go ahead and type in there. It starts you with Albert will, so then you can just add will match faces to and so forth. So you can write that in. And then now let's look at the criteria. There are two sets. One is the performance criterion or performance threshold, and the other is the observation periods. Performance criterion is 80%. So go to the second part, the one on the right, which is for percentage, and type in 80 into the little box, and then select from the drop-down with blank accuracy. So that turns it into with 80% accuracy. And in the second criterion, the observation periods, type on that first module 4 out of 5 in the respective boxes, and then you can choose from the drop-down trials. You'll see there that you could have chosen other things like days, weeks, or months, or observations, or quizzes, and so forth. So that's easy. It gives you this nice rubric and framework and helps you make sure that these are compliant goals, they're in smart format. Okay, there's one last thing to do with the software right now. You'll get to use it more in the breakouts. When you do this, you'll get a free student if you choose to use the software in the future. If you don't want to, no problem, but it's a neat tool. So in your Fast IEP interface, go to the lower right. There is a green button. It says click to share and earn, or share and earn. So click that and you'll get a pop-up, and this allows you to share and get credits. For right now, we want you to share with us. That way we'll know who you are and which accounts out there to give the free student to. So please do this. This way we'll know you're listening, and we'll know that, in fact, who you are, so we can give the free student. So just go ahead and type into those two boxes at the top, one that says name. Go ahead and put Fast IEP in that box, and the other, do support@fastiep.com as the email address. And then click enter. All right, great. That's how we'll know who you are and make sure to give you a free student to your account. And now you have a free pilot account anyway. You can use that as much as you want. No obligation, no pressure. We just believe it's an awesome tool and can help save time, which is what we all need more of. All right, and speaking of time, it's on to the next part of today. So thank you for your time.
So I think that concludes the webinar content that we have. I know we have a few minutes if anyone did have specific questions.
Happy to discuss any of the strategies from the trauma-informed unit or executive functioning, or any of the other parts.
Feel free to either type them in the chat or raise a hand. Looks like there's a couple that raised their hand. I don't want to put people on the spot, but if I know Jen Court, it looks like you might have had a question.
Yeah, I wondered how much the program supports differences in terms of race and religion and first language, et cetera.
Interesting question. So when you say the program, do you mean?
I mean, the website, in terms of, just because there are so many cultural differences in terms of how we present with socially and emotionally. And I just wondered if there's space for that as a description or any way to note it, or just to differentiate.
Well, absolutely. And it's something we take very seriously in our approach in general to facilitating and empowering students, and also different styles of learning that come from potentially cultural differences. And if you mean the website and the program, it's a blank palette really for you to use in whatever you want. And if you mean more of some of the strategies of avoiding certain types of declarative types of interactions with students who might be traumatized, part of what we were discussing actually in a pre-conversation before this was about respecting the fact that students bring a lineage and a history to your classroom, and will have different cultures and microcultures of their family. And I think some people in the chat were mentioning having specific types of close interactions in order to build that trust rapport. So I can sort of see on both sides an answer to that. But if you want to clarify any further, I can answer more.
I've just been very mindful of how, first of all, race and gender and all of the identifiers add so many nuances to how kids experience the world and how teachers experience them, as well as the pandemic has had a different impact on kids who come from marginalized groups. And just wondered where, how we're supporting teachers and how your work supports teachers to be mindful of that, especially teachers who are not yet doing their own work, to understand where they come from.
Absolutely. And you mentioned mindfulness. We didn't have the unit in here, but in our intentionality and mindfulness work, is very much about trying to adopt a position of empathy and compassion. And to do that, to try as best to live in the lived experience that the student brings. One little vignette. There was a study released fairly recently showing that if you pull the expectations of teachers using an implicit attitude tests, you're not asking them what do they think, but you use methods to indirectly find out what they think. Their expectation set for Black urban, actually girls, it was interesting, the study was focusing on the girls, not the boys, was that the expectation set is that they will be more mature, less needing of support, less needing of social emotional support. And I mean, that's not true, but the problem is if we expect that, we give less, right? And they might, because of certain types of backgrounds and behaviors, act in a way that's similar to students who are a year or two older from, let's say, a white community, and seem more mature in a sense, hardened, but therefore get less support and actually end up further traumatized. And so there's a little bit on that, but that wasn't included in today's work. It's more in our extended work.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
We also had a question, or it looks like a hand raised from Jessica Bach.
And Jessica, if not, then you also mentioned earlier offering students the opportunity to choose preferred books. Right? In other words, giving choice and agency. Do you want to elaborate on that? I thought that was a really important comment.
That's okay. Feel free to, if you have anything additional to say, you can always put it in the chat as well.
Absolutely. If anyone else would like to maybe share about that sense of agency and developing the skills and social risk taking that can support some emotional development. Jen, since you mentioned range, do you have a race, sorry, and gender? Do you have a fairly diverse classroom? Do you want to share any stories that have brought moments of epiphany for you? Jen, I'm not sure if you're there, but you're on mute at this point.
Yes, I'm a school counselor at a tiny little high school, just a little bit, an hour a week. And the rest of the time I consult with schools around diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. And one of the things that I hear from a lot of teachers and a lot of students is that I would say more from teachers, that the need to understand your own biases and how you relate to your kids, your students, particularly from a social, emotional, and trauma-based perspective, is even more acutely important, because it's hard to translate across identifiers in terms of who you are racially, gender, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, and more, if you're not aware of where you're coming from. So I'm always wanting to blend social emotional learning and diversity work into one lovely package to help our students and our colleagues to really be supportive.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And thank you for doing that service on the front lines and doing that work. It's so important. Have you been interacting with or even facilitating teachers who are interacting with these diverse populations through distance learning, through Zoom and such?
Absolutely.
Have you noticed or heard of others noticing a digital divide? And I don't mean just access, but in terms of who speaks up, who gets spoken over and such on a racial and gender divide?
So one thing that has come up quite a bit, and you mentioned that we age up students of color, particularly Black students. We see them as older than they actually are. And so we don't have the same number of supports. But the other thing is, and I don't know if this is anecdotal or not, but I've heard from a lot of schools that there are more students of color when given the hybrid option, as a school district, or because there's a bunch of outbreaks in their school, more students of color are choosing to be at home. And what happens, and I've been in a couple of Zoom rooms with students, is that it's often that they're the only kids whose faces you don't see with a mask on, and the screens are really big. So it's like a big version of an unmasked face. And also I've had quite a few kids tell me that they are the teachers are primarily teaching to the kids who are in the classroom, and those kids who are distance learning aren't getting the same attention. So it's like further compounding that sense of lack of support all the way through. And it's also access and opportunities, of course, as you mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. And further ostracizes. One of the reasons I'm asking there, so I'm very interested in this kind of inclusion, but inclusion from a place of compassion and empathy, is there's no numerical measure of these things right now. And we as an AI group, as well as teaching focused group, are experimenting with some ways of numerically measuring who speaks more and then who gets spoken over. Who is invited into the conversation, who's ostracized from the conversation, who, when they dare to speak, is ignored or invited further, and just the ratio and percentages of time contributing. There's also an interesting thing around mirroring gestures. If someone makes a contribution and others nod and smile along with, and someone else makes a contribution and people ignore, look away, seem perplexed, Now, that's a lot of social feedback that they may be getting in the classroom and actually teacher couldn't notice, a lot of side eye. But in this case, you could notice it because everyone is perpetually facing each other simultaneously. You realize that in Zoom, there's something that you can do easily that is not physically possible in the physical world. Everyone is simultaneously making eye contact with everyone. Think about it, in the real world, you can't do that. So everyone's also getting social feedback from each other, including the feedback of, turning off your video. There's sometimes reasons for that. So we will be able to quantify that. Is that something that sounds interesting to you, and how would you use it?
So one thing that yes, it sounds interesting. And I think any way that we can quantify and help support teachers and therefore help our students, the better. One of the things I wonder about, though, a question that I have is just in terms of how you would get the identifying information, considering that so many kids are multiracial and that gender is a more fluid understanding just over the last 5 years since all the changes.
Yeah.
But I think anything along those lines would be helpful, and especially if it was separating out, gender in terms of identifying as male, female, or other from gender expression. What do you look like?
I
think that'd be awesome. That'd be fantastic.
Sex assigned at birth and gender expression, gender preferences, and so forth. So the good thing is it would be a platform. So, and you're the teacher, you're able to input those things, and people are able to self-identify. And this is not something that is like for 5 minutes. It's over the course of a year, and you'd get your own feedback as to whether you're calling on some people more than others. Now, how are we on time? Is this an indication that it's over?
Yeah, we're
out of
a little
time.
over, Ned, at this point.
Oh, sorry. I'm
Oh,
sorry.
I was trying to use
No,
it.
that's okay.
That's okay. No. Interesting conversation.
Great conversation.
Yeah. Just a few things to wrap it up. Certainly, we want to thank Ned and the team from Brainpower for sharing some of that information with us and providing us with reminders about some things with SEL and sharing that tool that could be very helpful to folks as they are doing their work and they are just so overburdened with a million things that they've got to do these days. We'd like to thank you for taking time to attend the webinar this evening, and a reminder that if you wish to receive Act 20 or Act 48 credits, you have to complete the evaluation within 3 days. And if you happen to have a little QR reader on your phone right now, you can scan the QR code that you see there, and that will take you directly to the form that you can complete the survey. And once you submit that then will allow us to go ahead and process the Act 48 for you. If there is a topic that you would like us to address, something that you have some questions about, you'd like some more information, you need to have explored, please send us that topic or question to support@pamle.org. And as we're developing our schedule for the spring, we can potentially include that as a topic. As a reminder that we are doing these webinars on the second Wednesday of every month from 7 to 8 p.m. And our next webinar will feature Jen Court on Wednesday, December the 8th, again at 7 p.m. So Paul, I'll turn it over to you if you'd like to bring this to a conclusion this evening.
Thank you, Gail. Again, on behalf of PAMLE, we certainly thank our presenters and presentation from Brainpower, a great partner of PAMLE, and we're so proud to be a partner with you. And to Eastern University for hosting the webinar this evening and our webinar series this year. We will stay on as long as anyone has additional questions till about 8:20 or 8:30 at the latest. So if you have additional questions, attendees, or any members of our panel, this is a great time to do that. And thank you very much.
While we wait, in case anyone has a further question, I'll, for the record, say it's wonderful to be a partner with PAMLE, and through you to the so many teachers and districts and principals out there in Pennsylvania. And thank you for the work that you do and for partnering with us. We look forward to future and further partnership opportunities and events and creative ways to reach those who are helping nurture the minds and empower the minds of our next generation.
Thank you, Ned, very much. Jen and Amy look like they're still with us. Jen or Amy, do either of you have a question?
No, I'm just about to jump off, but thank you very much. I'll see you soon, Paul.
Absolutely. We'll look forward to your session on December 8th. Thank you, Jen.
And I look forward to seeing the Brainpower folks at our PAMLE events.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Bye, Gail.
Thanks, Jen. Nice to see you.
You too.
Okay.